Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here today for our webinar with the Smithsonian American Art Museum on analyzing change over time with documentary photography. Just want to start off by thanking you for your work as teachers and for setting aside some of your precious hours after school in the evening to expand your learning and seek out new resources. We really admire you for all your hard work in your classrooms and communities and your dedication to the education of your students. So before we begin, I want to say a brief word just about Humanities Texas and the work that we do. I know there are a lot of people joining us tonight who have been to our programs before, but some of you I know are joining us for your first Humanities Texas program. Humanities Texas. So hold on one second. Sorry, we have a new guest with us this evening. I apologize. He wanted to see what all the fun was about, but Humanities Texas is the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We're the State Humanities Council, and there's an organization like us in every state and U.S. territory. Each of us work to promote humanities education in our locality, and our mission here at Humanities Texas is to promote the appreciation and deeper understanding of the humanities in Texas. We do this in a number of ways. In addition to our education programs, we award grants, we circulate exhibitions, we hold reading and discussion programs for veterans in partnerships with schools and libraries. But in such a large state, and a major and important way that we can pursue our mission is to support classroom teachers. So we hold these professional development programs both in person and online throughout the year. Our focus is to provide you with an opportunity to study with outstanding scholars who will provide you with content, materials, training to enrich your courses and inspire your students. So returning teachers, welcome. It's great to see you guys. So pleased to see some new folks as well. We hope to see you at future programs. We'll have some closing announcements and we'll talk about some of the upcoming programs that we have. And we also hope that you guys will share the materials that you receive at tonight's webinar and at future programs that you attend with your colleagues and learning communities. So we also remain committed to holding programs that respond to and meet your needs. So I hope you'll let us know in the evaluation after today's webinar how we can continue to support you and what topics you need training in, what resources would be especially useful. So don't hesitate to let us know and reach out to us at any point. We'd love to talk to you more about the programs that we have for classroom teachers and how we can support your work. So just a couple of administrative announcements before I introduce our presenters tonight. You're welcome to leave your cameras on if you'd like, but make sure that when you're not speaking that your audio is muted so we can eliminate any unwanted background noise or feedback. Also, just make sure that your first and last name appear on your Zoom profile. This is how we can track your attendance for CPE credit, and message us if you have any questions on how to do that. We hope that you're able to join the Google Classroom. In addition to the resources that we provided in advance, we also will share tonight's slides with you after the program. So I'm asking my colleague Mark to drop in the Google Classroom link and code. So throughout the program, feel free to message us in the chat, drop any questions or comments that you have, and then stick around for a few closing announcements. And I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. Sorry, I ran through that very quickly, so don't hesitate to reach out to us in the chat if you have any specific questions. So I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters this evening. We're delighted to be joined by two educators from the Smithsonian American Art Museum, Phoebe Hillemann and Abby Hitzemann. Phoebe is the Teacher Institute educator at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. She has 12 years of experience designing, implementing educational programs for teachers and students there, including the museum's National Summer Institutes. She's interested in creative learning, creating learning experiences that are interdisciplinary, inquiry-based, and inclusive, all things that we are also very interested in. She has a BA in art history from Kenyon College and an MS Masters of Science in Education. Is that what that is? Okay, thank you.
Got it.
And, Museum Education and Leadership from Bank Street Graduate School of Education. And then we're also joined tonight by Abby. She is a project manager for the Creating Portraits of Community project at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. She holds her master's in education and instructional designer and educator. She uses her love of collaboration to make equitable learning materials and environments. She teams up with teachers in rural communities, Washington, D.C., and museum education professionals at the Smithsonian and its affiliates to create curriculum that enables students to develop interdisciplinary skills by connecting with their communities. So I think we're in great hands for this program tonight, and really excited that we're here to talk about documentary photography and how we can use that in the classroom. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Phoebe and Abby.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. We're so excited to be with you here tonight virtually. And I know we didn't give you a lot of time to respond to this warm-up question or these two questions that we have on the screen here. But if you haven't already, maybe just take one moment before we dive in to read through these questions and just think about them at least for yourself, and feel free to add some thoughts in the chat if you'd like. And this is kind of related to the content of the photographs we're looking at tonight. So we're asking you to think about where you go regularly in your life, and this could be in person or virtual spaces. Think about what types of relationships maybe you formed from going to these places regularly. And then think about perhaps how these spaces have helped foster community for you. So feel free to keep thinking about those questions, add any thoughts in the chat if you feel compelled to do so, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So tonight we are exploring this idea of analyzing change over time with documentary photography. So we're going to be looking closely at a few photographs from our museum's collection that are part of a documentary series focused on Texas specifically, Galveston, Texas in this case. I don't know if anyone here is from Galveston. Please let us know in the chat if you are. But we're going to be modeling some strategies that you can use in your classroom with your students to analyze photographs, and a few different approaches that you might take. And then we'll also offer some suggestions for kind of extended student engagement with the photography series that we're discussing. So I know Liz already introduced us a little bit, but just to build on that, again, I'm Phoebe Hillemann. I'm the Teacher Institute's educator at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, or SAM, as we're called. So I work with a national audience of classroom teachers across curriculum areas. So I do work with art teachers, but I also work really frequently with social studies, history, and English language arts teachers on using art as an interdisciplinary tool for critical thinking, visual literacy, all kinds of skills that you want students to practice across the curriculum, as well as content learning. And I will let my colleague Abby introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Hitzemann, and I am the project manager for the Creating Portraits of Community project. And I'm actually a contractor, and I'm contracted through Smithsonian American Art Museum. So my project is a little bit different. I'm funded through a grant called Together We Thrive. And our main objective is to help teachers create portraits of communities in their classrooms by helping their students take photographs and collect oral histories and videos if they so choose. And we are currently working with teachers in rural Kansas, Kentucky, and DC. So I'm also working with teachers across disciplines. And also, as Phoebe mentioned, the very interdisciplinary approach. So I'm working with social studies teachers, photography teachers, and videography teachers. So I'm also very excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just give a little bit of context about where we're coming from. So again, we're at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, which is part of the larger Smithsonian institution. So you may or may not know the Smithsonian is the world's largest museum complex, and it's actually made up of 21 museums as well as the National Zoo. and a number of research centers and libraries. So it's this really large museum, research, and education complex. And feel free to let us know in the chat if you've visited any Smithsonian museums or done any programming with us before, or maybe you've used a Smithsonian resource in your classroom. You can see here kind of the breadth of the museums that are part of the Smithsonian. So we've got, the Natural History Museum up at the top there with the elephant. We've got history museums like the National Museum of African American History and Culture on the top left. You see the Star-Spangled Banner on the bottom there from the American history. We've also got art museums. In addition to our own, there's the National Portrait Gallery, where you can see, the presidential portraits. You see Obama's there, in addition to many other types of portraiture, of course. There's the African Art Museum, the Asian art museums, and actually the Cooper Hewitt in New York is our design museum. Some people don't know that there are Smithsonian museums outside of DC as well. And then, of course, we've got our National Zoo, probably the most photogenic of our museums. We're very excited that we've gotten 2 new pandas just this past week from China. So big news in Smithsonian world. Yes, and a shout out for the Postal Museum. Love it. One of the lesser known museums, but it's super interesting. So just to give you a sense, if you have visited DC and the Smithsonian before, just to give you a sense of where we are located a few blocks north of the National Mall, where you'll find the majority of the museums. And we share our historic building with the Portrait Gallery. So this is just a little snapshot of our museum, SAM. You can see our building up there in the top left, and then some of our galleries in these photographs. So our collection includes over 46,000 artworks, which you can imagine can be very overwhelming. So only a small percentage of that number is on view at the museum at any given time. Things are rotated in and out, so we can show as much as possible. But the good news is that 92% of that collection is digitized. So for you as educators, you can access almost all of it virtually through our website and use it with your students. And our collection really tells the story of American history, American culture, the American experience, through the colonial, pre-colonial period up through the present day. So we've got 17th century art up through 21st century, all different types of media, from painting to sculpture to video, photography, craft, textile, folk art. So a really broad selection of types of art. Okay. So just to kind of set the stage a little bit for our session tonight, where we're exploring documentary photography, our goals for you for our time together are to help build our visual literacy and critical thinking tools. We'll give you a chance to apply those tools and thinking skills to historical photography based in a local community in Texas. And then we'll reflect on these ideas of change and continuity over time. And we'll leave you with some classroom resources to take away. And I'll just mention, we've already shared a list of links and resources from our session with Liz that I believe she's posted on the Google Classroom. And we'll also be sharing our slides from this session with you. So hopefully you can just be full participants and not worry about writing everything down that we're saying, because you'll have access to all of it afterward. All right, more love for the Postal Museum. Thanks, Kathleen. Love it. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Abby now.
Thanks, Phoebe. So we're going to start by meeting this photograph. So let's start by building a foundation for looking at photography. We'll take a couple of seconds just to look, starting by looking around the edges from top to bottom, left to right, and then working our ways to the middle of the photograph. So I'll just give us a couple seconds to take some time and look at the photograph. What do you notice, and what are your eyes drawn to?
And Abby, just to clarify, would you like people to respond in the chat?
Not for right now. I think just for right now, I would prefer if everyone would just take some time and look, and then we'll fill in the chat a little bit later.
Okay, great. So we're just looking and thinking.
Okay, yep. Nothing else. Thank you Phoebe, for clarifying. I actually put a timer for us so I wouldn't go too fast, so I apologize for hearing that noise. Okay, now let's focus to what type of photograph do we think this is? Based on what you were looking at before, or maybe some things that you noticed, maybe come up with some ideas on what you think this type of photograph, or what type of photograph this is. Proud family portrait of a business, getting some answers. So please, at this point, if you feel like it, put your observations in the chat. More family portraits. More observations about the family. I was noticing that too. Some of the kids didn't have shoes on. Oh, staged. Possibly for some marketing or in the local newspaper. Some advertisements on the top. So here are some different types of photography, and I apologize, there should be a space between landscape and family and satellite and panoramic and candid. It got a little mixed up, but it looks like we are having some of the same ideas.
It's interesting looking at this list, Abby, and thinking about some of the responses we've seen in the chat. And I feel like this photograph might fit into multiple categories from your list. Like might be a portrait, it might be a family photograph, might also be posed, could be a documentary.
Many different things. Applying, Phoebe, as we've discussed, applying the ideas of selfie to this as well with our different modern takes on taking photos.
Right. Yes, how would this be different today if it was a family selfie? And I on that theme of connecting past and present, I noticed Kathleen's comment about this store being a lot smaller than current grocery stores. So already starting to make some comparisons between whenever this photograph was taken and our present day.
So that's a good segue into our next focus on our photograph. So again, I'd like us to keep looking close, but this time think about the people, objects, the activity, and setting that everyone's in. And I know we already had some responses to this, but if anyone else would like to also put some of those things in the chat, we would love to hear your observations. Again, thinking about the different things that are being sold. We have some produce, and I think some brooms on the top. Kind of thinking, I'm not really seeing any, and it might be kind of difficult based on the detail in the photograph, but not really any kind of like electrical outlets or any kind of technology, I guess, in the way that we think about things today. I was thinking the same thing, a little bit of everything store. Can pick everything up on the corner.
A lot of people seem to be noticing the banners and the advertisements, as well as some of the information about pricing on those advertisements that might give us a sense of time period.
Well, thank you everyone for your observations. So we're going to take what we've seen into a little bit of a thinking routine that we use a lot at SAM with different artworks. So we're going to use the thinking routine called See, Think, Wonder. We've already done the seeing part, so just taking a lot of time to observe what's in the photograph. So now I'd like us to think about what we're observing. And as Phoebe said, she already kind of pointed us in the way of thinking about, well, maybe what time frame is this in based on what we're seeing? So what do you think about what you see? Maybe Depression era?
Yeah, I think there's an instinct, I mean, especially if we're among teachers, to kind of figure out the historical time period here.
I know we can always seem so quick about things and especially being virtual, but yes, I do think taking the time to slow down and look, the longer you look, it keeps revealing a little bit more and more with something. So I think that is a really fun, important way, but even for myself, just remembering to slow down and look.
Mhm.
Yes, before plastic packaging, I don't really see, there's no plastic in this from what we can tell. Everyone's dressed up, thinking about how everybody would have a role in the store. So now taking what we think about our observations a little bit further into what do we wonder about these people in this photo and about the store at large in the community?
And as you've probably noticed, the distinction between think and wonder is often a little bit blurry. Sometimes some of our thoughts become wonders. So we've already got some good ones in the chat about the roles of family members in the store and where this is, when it is. The children attend school.
Food hygiene and thinking about bacteria. First generation. Purpose of the photo. Ah, taxes for this business. These are really good wonders. Impacted by weather, which could obviously hurt a business. Okay, these are great wonders and observations. So we often use this a lot as a way to the see, think, wonder as a way to build a conversation around the photograph, and then we'll show more information about the photo. So in our next slide, we'll have all of what we call the tombstone information about the photo. So we can see where the photograph was taken, who is in it, what year it was taken. So for this photo, we don't actually know who took it. It was reprinted in 1980 by Betty, I can never pronounce her name, Tichich, for the photo survey of photos that were taken during the 250th anniversary of the United States. But we do know the name of the family that's in the photo, and it was taken originally in the early 1900s. So now that we have all of our observational information together with actual information about the photo, it can lead us further into thinking about why this photo was taken and how we could use this resource with other historical evidence to create a larger historical picture of the time. And we can also think about how this photograph as a primary source gives us information that other primary sources like transcripts gives us. So are there any questions on that thinking routine? Or I guess about the photograph in general? Okay, let's move on to some more critical thinking strategies. So here we have 3 photos that were taken. Again, the one in the middle is the photo we've just been looking at, and the other 2 were taken for the I can't, sorry, ugh, the National Endowment for the Arts photographic survey during the 200th anniversary of the US. So we would just like you to look across the 3 of these photos. Again, just taking a moment just to observe them. You don't need to write anything down in the chat box. Just take some time and look at all 3.
And we're going to give you a chance to look at these more close up in just a few minutes. So right now, this is just an initial look, but we'll give you an extended look time later.
Are we ready for breakout rooms?
Oh, sorry, Liz, just a minute. So with your initial looking or closer looking at the photographs, is there anything that you feel like is the same between the 3 of these? And if you would like, you could put your observations in the chat box.
Yeah, so Eleanor's noting that they're all photos of businesses. Danielle's agreeing, all stores with people in them. Excellent. Are there any major differences or contrasts?
Marketing is in front. Yep.
And Dawn's mentioning the centering of family in the left and center images. Yep, and Christina's noting that there's more racial diversity represented, looking at these three photos as a whole. There's some similarities in the choice of medium, as well as some of the products that we see across time periods. Interesting. So we're making the educated guess based on what we see, that these are not from the same time period.
Products, but different and changing, or but changes in packaging. Okay, well, that kind of gives us a preview of the photos we're going to look at in our breakout room. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes. We have a slide pack that you will see after you access this Google Doc link in the chat. So the first slide will give you some directions, and slide number 6 will have some questions, the same questions that you see on this slide. So just asking about how the images are connected and what ways do they expand each other on each other, and then what kind of stories they can tell taken together of a community. So we would love it if you would hop in a breakout room.
Yes,
And
I will go ahead and assign, we'll have about 4 to 5 people per breakout room. So I'm going to go ahead and create them and open them up for everyone. And if there's any questions, feel free to jump back in here and let us know.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Liz. So we wanted to just take a moment and give you a chance to share any of the things that you discussed in your breakout room. If there were particular takeaways or interesting conversations that you had, we would love to hear. And this is an opportunity where you're welcome to come off mute for a moment and share. You're also welcome to share a takeaway in the chat. Yes, don't be shy.
I know in our group, we talked about how these small stores were just more common back then. Especially here, I'm in Austin, and I just can't remember a store that I've been to that looks something like this. And then someone chimed in that their parents are from a really, really small town, and this was just more common. So that was just an interesting take.
Nice. Thanks so much, Stephen. Yeah, so thinking about like the change in time, maybe shift from small mom and pop stores to larger chain stores, but also regional geographic differences in types of stores that are common. Would anyone else like to jump in?
Our group kind of talked about some of those same things along those lines. And being that it's Galveston, we also talked about hurricanes perhaps could be reasoning for some of the businesses closing or not continuing to exist. And we also noticed like some of the products that were placed, the items that are no longer available, and then some that are available. And we talked about like the flooring. Someone mentioned linoleum, and I said we were kind of telling our age that we can recognize that in one of the photos.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's great. And really interesting context about the hurricane risk in Galveston, thinking about how place and geography might impact sort of the the economics and the culture of this place. Thank you. Any other takeaways before we move on?
I really liked what Brady said in our group. Our group had good conversation, so I'm gonna spotlight on him, let him share that. But then I was curious, like, why do you guys have one that looked like it was taken in 1910 and the other two from the 70s, it looks like? I was just curious because
Yeah, so great question. And I'll give a little more context about that in a minute. As Abby mentioned briefly, these photographs were all included in a photographic series that was made around the bicentennial in the late 1970s, sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts. But as part of this Galveston series, the photographer Betty Titchich actually reprinted, she found some historical photographs of Galveston corner stores from earlier time periods. So in the larger collection that I'll show you in just a moment, you'll find photographs from the 1950s, from the 30s, from the 1910s, even from, I think there's one from 1890. So I think she was interested in looking at this idea of change over time. Great question. All right. Is there anybody else who would like to share a takeaway from, or a question or a thought from your breakout room? It sounded like you had some great discussions. Thank you for sharing. And that was actually a great segue into this resource that I just wanted to share with you. So you might be wondering, how large is this series? How many additional photographs are there that we didn't look at? So I created a collection for you on our platform called the Smithsonian Learning Lab, which is a platform for educators that it's free to use. You can create personalized collections of resources from the Smithsonian, and you can also just use it to search and find objects or collections that other people have created. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for just a second, or I'm going to switch my screen share actually to go to the Learning Lab. So hopefully you can see this here. So what I've done is I've pulled a number of photographs from this larger series of the Galveston survey, which again, it's an NEA sponsored series created mostly between 1976 and 1981. Although, as I mentioned, some of these photographs are reprints of older historical photographs, mostly by unknown photographers. So they give us this visual record of this changing community over time. And what I've done for this collection is you see there are several photographs from the same stores, sometimes from different time periods. So I've organized it by store. So you'll have the link to this in the resource document that we created and posted on the Google Classroom for you. But you can explore these photographs in more detail. If you click on them in the Learning Lab, you get sort of this information and metadata on the left-hand side to tell you a little bit more about when this was taken, who made it, what was the title, and if there is any extended label written by a curator, that would be there as well. So hopefully that's useful for you and interesting to explore kind of this larger series, since we won't have time to look at all of them today. I'm going to go back into my slideshow here. Okay. So we wanted to now look at another photograph in the series using kind of a different critical thinking strategy. And in this one, we wanted to offer you 5 different lenses through which to analyze a photograph. And obviously there are many more lenses that we could bring to an object. These ones are more, focused on social studies topics, but you could also come at this from an identity lens, or, thinking about from the lens of a woman, how do I read this photograph? Just for an example. But in this case, we're going to look at the photograph thinking about cultural lens, governmental, economic, technological, or geographical. So you can see a little bit of description for each of those lenses here, and think about what types of things might you notice in the photograph. And we're going to show you a larger version in just a moment, because I know it's a little bit hard to see here. But I just want to give you an example of one of these. So for instance, if I were going to look at this photograph through an economic lens, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about kind of 2 different ways of looking at economics. I'm looking both at the woman behind the counter, who appears to be working at the cash register, and I'm also thinking about the customers. So for this woman who appears to be working at this store, I'm wondering, thinking about open-ended questions that this lens might prompt. So a closed-ended question is one that has maybe a yes or no answer, or a closed response. Whereas an open-ended question maybe offers us more room to have a conversation, to bring in different perspectives. So open-ended questions I'm thinking about through an economic lens are maybe how profitable is this store for the family that owns it? Maybe how have the economics of owning a corner store in Galveston, Texas changed since the time this photograph was taken? And then maybe from a customer perspective, I'm making the assumption that these people on the left side are customers. How might changing costs of food over time, how might those impact community diets or health? How are the choices that we make about what to buy impacted by the economics? So those are just a few examples. So what I'd like for you to do now is think about these 5 lenses and choose one that you're interested in focusing on. And then again, we'll give you a larger version of the photograph to look at. And then just for yourself, try to draft 3 open-ended questions about the photograph using that lens. And then maybe choose your favorite 1 or 2 questions to share in the chat. And I think Abby is going to copy and paste those 5 lenses into the chat so that you'll have them to look at. But I wanted to give you the larger version of the photograph here with the label information. Thank you, Abby. Perfect. All right, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to choose your lens and try to draft your at least 2 or 3 open-ended questions, and then maybe share one in the chat with us. Great. And I see some people are starting to share their open-ended questions in the chat. Love it. I'm going to give everybody a couple more minutes, and then we'll talk about some of these questions. Okay, please keep sharing your questions if you haven't already. But it's been really interesting to read through these and see sort of the different lenses that you've used. Abby, as you're looking through these, is there anything that stands out to you?
I was thinking a lot, especially with post-COVID and how it's changed a lot, how we go out into the world from our house, at least for me personally. So I was thinking about this in terms of how people are dressed, not only how that could maybe tell us about the time period. Um, so for me personally, I was thinking uh, how now a lot of us go out of the house in like sweatpants and I'm maybe not dressed up when I go to the corner store to buy things, and was just thinking about how that was maybe different for people when this photo was taken, making sure that your hair was done and like both of the women have jewelry on, and just maybe difference in appearance when going out into the world. So I guess from a cultural standpoint.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting cultural perspective. And I see a lot of conversation in the chat about technology and how that has changed over time. Noticing like the record keeping system here, I think we see those boxes that say American cheese on them. Seems to be like the customer records. How do customers and store owners track purchases? Was everything cash-based? I also see some conversation about Jim Crow, and so from a governmental perspective, thinking about laws around segregation, how might that have impacted the people that we see and don't see in this photograph? And it's an interesting question. I did notice when I was looking through the photographs to create the learning lab, there are definitely certain stores that seem to be more heavily Black or more heavily Hispanic based on the photographs that I see. So you can sort of see perhaps evidence of segregation in these photographs, and whether it's legal segregation or based on housing. See, and lots of good questions about sort of economics. We have some geography questions, thinking about how far these people lived from the location they were photographed in, how did they get there, how might that influence the things that they bought and how often they visited. Great, thank you so much. So I think, you could apply this strategy of looking at a photograph or an object or an artwork through these 5 lenses. You could apply this to all kinds of different things, and allows us to really delve into different perspectives around a topic. So thank you. All right. Before I move on, are there any questions or thoughts about this strategy, the 5 lenses? Okay, great. We will move on. All right, so we've practiced a number of critical thinking skills and strategies around analyzing photography tonight. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about how to make historical photographs relevant, exciting, interesting for students. And thinking about how might we spark curiosity, inquiry, and research. So I wanted to just give you an example based on my own experience looking at these photographs. And Abby can tell you, I kind of went down a rabbit hole as we were preparing for this webinar, and got very curious based on this photograph that we just looked at. So I noticed this photograph was taken in the late 1970s at the Star Cash store, and I saw that it's owned by this family, the Carmignani family, and there's an address for the store. And then I noticed that there was a photograph of the Carmignani family in front of their store at the same address from 1950. So I started wondering, is one of these figures in the photograph the same woman that we see behind the counter here? It looks like it might be, but it's a little bit hard to tell, 26, 27 years later. But we also see the exterior of the building, which gives us a little more context about the neighborhood and the space, and we see the vehicle in front of the store, which definitely places us in time a little bit. So then, of course, I went to Google Maps because I had to see what would come up when I Googled this address today. So you can see there on the far right, the Google Street View results that I got. And this is as recent as this past April. So you can see the building has a lot of architectural similarities, but it looks like it's no longer a commercial storefront. It looks like it's just a residence at this point. I love how you can see the car, the modern car here, and it would be fun to contrast that with the 1950 photograph. But you can see some things kind of similar, the power lines in the background. But it made me wonder, when did this store go out of business, or did it move? What happened to this family? I started Googling the last name and found some obituary records from Galveston. So as you can tell, I got really invested in this story and really curious about who these people were, and ooh, Stephen, good question. Did you search the National Archives database via address to find the second photo? So that second photo is also in our collection. So I didn't go through the National Archives, but I'm curious. I just used Google to do some searching, but I bet if I looked through the National Archives, there might be additional resources to find. So anyway, I just thought this was an example of how photography, it can sort of spark these moments of inquiry and research rabbit holes for students, and tools like Google Maps might allow them to make connections to their present moment and make these comparisons and contrasts across time. So I wanted to then turn it over to Abby, continuing our thinking about connecting past and present.
So similar to Phoebe, I really wanted to find a way to make this potentially exciting and fun for students, and finding a theme that they can trace back to what they're experiencing in their everyday lives. So I kind of was thinking about how I would like to take photos of my community spaces or my local hangouts. So that was kind of where the idea for this activity started. So using our example of community spaces and our topic or theme of community spaces in historical photography, I would have students create a base for analyzing the photos first. So using maybe the see, think, wonder, and close looking, and maybe the lenses, and then have them think about how their local communities use or do not use local grocery stores or other places for gathering, or maybe how gathering is different now. So maybe people are gathering more virtually versus in person, and maybe you're not really a local at like that gas station or that coffee shop anymore. Maybe those things are changing. So then the second part would be have students go to the places that they go to regularly where people will maybe know them, and take photos of those places. So the examples on the slides are from my local, where I've been going probably at least once or twice a week for the last 3 years, and I work remotely. So for me, I really like getting out of the house and having that feeling of community. And I have gotten to be friends with the baristas because of being in proximity to them, not because we were friends first, but because I met them through this community space. So another interesting thing with this too is a lot of our historical photographs in this series are all in black and white. So I think a fun thing for students to do would also be to maybe shoot some things in black and white to see how that can maybe tell the difference in time, and how they can look at things through that lens as well. And in this photograph, I think because the silverware and the technology, you can tell that it's a more modern photograph versus the one from the 1970s. But again, using those other thinking strategies for comparing and contrasting and seeing continuity and change over time. So again, just thinking of a theme within historical photographs, and then having your students think about that theme and have them compare it to what they're going through. And this slide is a photograph, or is a slide of work that students have done through the project I'm working on called the Creating Portraits of Community Project. And through our project, we're helping teachers facilitate the collection of community portraits in their classroom. So students are taking photographs and collecting oral histories and videos. And these particular photographs are from Kansas, rural Kansas. And this student was capturing photos of her friend and her mother cooking dinner. And again, I think these photos are really interesting contrast between our historical photography from the 70s that are taken by potentially a photographer that's age 20 and above, and comparing that with photos that were taken this last spring by people who are teenagers. So quite a bit of things, age and time period, to contrast and see how people are viewing their communities.
I think it's so cool to see too, like what happens when you give students the agency to become documenters of their communities. And I feel like it must be very empowering for students and maybe help them see their communities in different lights.
A big portion of the project as well is students have full autonomy over what they choose and what they get to do. So there's an assignment, and we waffled a long time about rubrics, but by and large, this is what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. So that's also been a really, really fun, I guess fun's maybe not the right word, but really empowering and great thing to see students taking the lead and uplifting the stories they want to tell.
And I think you said, Abby, that you had some resources to share from the Creating Portraits of Community project. If participants here tonight are interested in using any of the lesson plans or seeing more about what you've done with the students, you're going to be sharing some of those resources. Oh, perfect.
So for right now, as Phoebe shared with us before about the Learning Lab platform in general, this is a learning lab that was created for the Creating Portraits of Community project. So what this is the curriculum from the project. And this is the version that can be done asynchronously by students at home. So this is from the perspective of a student with being student driven. So there isn't necessarily any lesson plan directions in it, but more online learning instead.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that, Abby. All right. So we are coming to the close of our time together, and we wanted to just take some time to reflect a little on what we've done in the last 75 minutes or so, and think about what you might take from this or apply to your teaching environment. So we've got a few questions for you, and feel free to come off mute here or share your thoughts in the chat, whatever works best for you. But the first question we have is, how does analyzing photography through different perspectives and tools create a greater dialogue when teaching history? So if anyone has any thoughts on this question, feel free to share.
Well, I personally have enjoyed this thus far. And I believe that utilizing something like this is an excellent tool in the classroom because it allows students to, I put in the chat earlier that autonomy is our word of the year. It provides students with that ability to, as well as metacognition, because they could think about their own thinking, like it's okay, it's a safe space, that there's no wrong answer with those types of with that types of questioning. They can use it and then we can feed off of one another. So I think that's excellent. And then I'll add that this summer I actually attended a national endowment for the humanities deal, and we went to, like, we visited cemeteries, and we also had like our resources were pictures of the cemeteries, and even thinking about like in those time periods that there was a certain place where people of different races couldn't be buried in the same place. So it lends itself to so much and opens the door for teachers to have a meaningful conversation without even having a conversation. Like, students can bring it to the table. So that's what I enjoy most. So I can't wait to use this in my class.
That's great. Thank you so much. And some really important ideas in there, thinking about what you said about artwork or photography, offering students autonomy and also, the chance to express their ideas without fear of being wrong. I think that's one of the beauty of teaching with art. It opens up the opportunity for students who maybe don't feel as confident in classroom discussions to participate, because they can, as long as they can see and observe, they can be part of the conversation.
Nadra,
really-
sorry,
Go ahead.
No, Nadra, I was just going to add too, when we've been working with students, we were getting some very personal and very, maybe not always the happiest of stories, but students were very candid about the different experiences they've been going through, whether that's violence in their community or personal struggles with autism, or just they were very open and very candid about what they wanted to share. And I think that was one of the best things that has been coming out of this project, where the students were really empowered to not only not feel afraid to do that, but also knowing that these stories would be shared beyond their classroom and to a larger audience. So I think also the students were feeling maybe less alone because across different states, they're all sharing these very impactful stories. So it was creating this network of um, just understanding our differences. So I feel a lot what you've been saying as well. And I almost feel taken aback by their bravery to come out and share these things about themselves because I feel like as adults sometimes I don't have the bravery to do that. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
Thank you. And I'm seeing so many great thoughts in the chat as well, thinking about, opening students up to different perspectives, practicing analytical skills that could be helpful in spotting fake or altered images, which is something we all know we have to be aware of these days. Looking for omissions in photographs. So helping students think about what don't we see and why might that be? And human connections and empathy. So there's lots of really great stuff that we're getting from this. Let's see. So our next question is about how highlighting community voices and spaces might fill in historical gaps. And I think for the sake of time, I'm going to allow you to respond to the next two questions at once if you like. So I think we started touching on some of that a little bit, but we're also just wondering about what you might take away from this session. The photography, the visual literacy, the critical thinking tools, what might be useful for you in your classroom. So any thoughts or reflections on either of those questions? Feel free to jump in, unmute, or share in the chat.
I started typing it, but I've been typing all day. So I'm a special ed teacher, so all I do is type hard paperwork. But I was going to say, for how can highlighting community voices and spaces fill in historical gaps? For me, I think it can. Oops, sorry. I think students oftentimes have a skewed vision of what's true and what's not true, right? Whether it's like fake news or what they hear on TV or TikTok or whatever. So I think highlighting community voices, I think showing these photographs and showing them what's true. Like you can't argue with something that's a fact that's in front of you, right? Something tangible that they can see. So I think that could be good as opposed to something that's a fact, right? It's coming from a well-known source like the historical archives, what have you, that they can say, no, this really happened. This is what did happen. Now give me your opinion on it. What do you think now? Kind of thing. And I think you can connect photography and visual literacy. Like I teach English primarily. So I definitely think you can connect photographs to like time periods in novels or to a theme in a novel or have them think critically about something. I think it's good for learners too that aren't so great with written word, but can look at a picture and still give you a response. So I don't know. I'm just trying to think outside the box.
No, that's great. Thank you, Lisa. And some great comments in the chat as well. Sometimes we see different voices that aren't normally seen. And that gives life to discussion about interesting time periods. Stephen's thinking about using it to show how legislation has changed communities over time and get students interested in the democratic process and its effects. Absolutely, yeah. This is a great way to sort of zoom in on a local community and maybe think about intersections with government and democracy and policy. Yeah, so filling in historical gaps is huge. Students may now consider photographing something other than themselves in the restroom. So opening up their perspectives, perhaps. Love it. Yeah, and bringing a space that's familiar and connecting it to the past. So yeah, making the past maybe a little bit more approachable, relevant for students, something that they can compare to an experience that they've all had of going to a grocery store. And yeah, helping them realize that they are part of the future, making it personal. These are great comments. Thank you. Don's raising that idea again of what might not be in the photograph and what might that tell us. Tiffany's thinking about analyzing pictures during the Great Depression unit to have students use these techniques to pique interest and create discussions based on the details of the photos. Yes, doing history. So students are becoming active participants. They're doing research and inquiry. And Don was also thinking about what aren't they noticing for their photos? Great questions. All right. Abby, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we move on?
No, I was gonna say, this is great. And another, not to point out our project, the Creating Portraits project again, but another big thing is, again, in one of the comments that was mentioned, but getting kids to come back to those local connections and realizing that history isn't something intangible out there that they can't change or they can't do anything about. It's really coming back to where they're or the community that they're a member of, and how all their little actions really do create big actions.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, so we are wrapping up our time together, and again, we've already shared a bunch of the resources that we mentioned tonight with you, so you'll have access to that on the Google Classroom as well as our slides. I just wanted to put in a plug here, especially for this this lesson plan on our website that you can see a screenshot of here, called Recording a Changing Nation. And that's a lesson plan for teachers that is about these NEA photographic surveys. So we looked at the Galveston photos tonight, but this was a larger project of photographic surveys in 55 communities in 30 states across the US. And 13 of those surveys are in Sam's collection. So these lesson plans sort of give an overview of visual literacy and analysis skills and how you might use these photographs to build them. I mean, it also will give you access to more of the photographic surveys if you're interested in exploring other communities in the US. And then, we've got a bunch of other great resources that we hope you'll explore after this session. We mentioned the thinking routine, See, Think, Wonder. We didn't mention that that's part of Harvard's Project Zero, which, if you're not familiar with Project Zero, they have an amazing website where you can explore these different thinking routines that you could use in all kinds of different situations with your students. So they're one of my favorite teaching tools, so I hope you'll explore those if you haven't before. All right, so that is it for us, I think, tonight. And we've got our email addresses shared here. So if you have any questions for us later or want to follow up, you can contact us.